All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Oops, that's not supposed to be there. That's from yesterday. Sorry, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to, is it Tuesday or Wednesday? It's Tuesday. Welcome to Tuesday. My girlfriend thought it was Friday yesterday. It was a crushing realization for her when she was like, "Oh no, I thought it was Friday and it's only Monday." So, welcome to Tuesday. It's a little bit cold here in Vancouver, as you may have noticed. It's going to get a little bit colder this week. How is everyone coming in? Did you bundle up? You okay? You're not cold? You're not talking to me? You just, okay. All right. That's fine. Let's say good morning to some people. So Ryan is here. Good morning, Ryan. Nicole is here. Good morning, Nicole. Sarah's here. Good morning, Sarah. Simrat is here. Good morning, Simrat. And Shania is here. Good morning, Shania. All right. So let's. Oh yeah, we were dealing with Adam. We were dealing with Adam, but we had a few minutes left. We had a few minutes left in the documentary about Adam Pearson, right? So let's start off with that. Let's just finish that. Let's just finish that documentary. I think we had about 10 minutes left. I'm just going to call it up here on my computer. So online people, of course, the link and the questions are still in Microsoft Teams, and I think we're 45 minutes in, right? Because we did 20 and 25 minutes. So we're about 45 minutes in. So online people watch from 45 minutes to the end. We'll do the same thing, and then we'll come back and sort of debrief from Adam, and then we'll move on to some other things, okay? So let's just finish it off, and we'll see you in just a few minutes, okay? So, all right. So are we back? Yeah, we're back. So there we go, right? Adam Pearson, cute little documentary, but lots of very important information in it, right? And we went from the very beginning to sort of seeing how people interact with him on the street, on the bus, in the nightclub. And then he kind of went on a bit of a, in the middle part of the documentary, he went on a bit of a quest to uncover some information about disability hate crime, right? And why the numbers are the way they are, and maybe why people aren't being convicted of disability hate crimes in the numbers that these crimes seem to be occurring, right? And then finally, this last part talks a little bit about prejudice and sort of we see people who are, you know, their prejudice level is measured, and then they meet Adam. Their prejudice levels are reduced, and so he decides it's a good idea to maybe do some stand-up comedy. And I think he's kind of funny. No? Come on, he had a couple of good ones. So what I wanted to ask you is, or what I wanted to point out to you is that, you know, this is a nice little documentary. It talks a lot about discrimination and stereotypes and prejudice, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about privilege as a result of this too. But if I asked you, and I am asking you, let's use our critical thinking skills. What's the argument here? Because documentaries are arguments as well, right? They're trying to convince you of something, right? They're making an argument that something is a certain way. And so what is the argument that Adam is making, do you think? So we'll need a conclusion. We'll need the main point of this whole thing. Okay. I think I have an idea. What's the main thing he wants to get across to us? Okay.
The first of them is ableism is seen as like less important than other pressures, and the second one is spending time with people with disability can reduce prejudice.
Okay. So we've got two ideas that are kind of floating around in this documentary for sure. The idea that prejudice against people with disabilities, ableism or disableism, or however you want to phrase it, doesn't seem to be on people's radar. It doesn't seem to be something that people are thinking about or talking about or paying attention to, right? The second one is that actually spending time with disabled people can reduce people's prejudice levels, right? And we can see that happen in a few instances. So yeah, those are two kind of main ideas that occur in this documentary. What other things what other bigger ideas are there?
Also, people treat disabled people from their face, not their personality.
Right. So Adam, but not only Adam, Dan and Lucas and Hayden, all of those people have been treated a particular way and have been treated badly simply because of their disability, right? For Lucas and Hayden and Adam because of their facial disfigurement, for Dan because he's using a wheelchair, right? So people with disabilities, whether it's facial disfigurements or other things, they face discrimination in society, right? They're not treated equally, they're treated as less than. People don't feel they don't have to follow social rules. People treat them as public property. People say rude things and type rude things on their YouTube page and things like that. So that's another big idea here too, right? Is that people in society with disabilities face prejudice and discrimination every day, right? People aren't really talking about disableism. People aren't really paying attention to it. Spending time with people with disabilities can reduce prejudice levels. Okay, so I think those are all kind of main ideas and kind of premises to support his main idea. But what's his main idea, do you think? How would you kind of sum up all those things in one kind of statement? Oh, we're so close. So close. How can we sum all those things up?
Can't fight with everyone, just ignore them.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that because in the end, that's not what Adam does, right? He doesn't sort of go off and ignore people. He's actually like purposely reaching out, right? He's getting up on stage and telling jokes, trying to connect with people. So, what do you think?
Ableism exists and it can be fixed.
Yeah. So and I was kind of thinking of a more like a longer version, but that's exactly what I was thinking too. Is that so? You said prejudice is a problem, but it can be fixed. Yeah, I think that's the conclusion of his argument, and you could flower that up a bit. You could say people with disabilities face all kinds of barriers and discrimination in society. And we can see this in people's individual behavior, and we can see it in terms of the state infrastructure, right? In terms of how laws work and things like that. However, there are some remedies to this, right? There are some ways to fix this. And one of those ways is to, is for people to engage with people with disabilities, and that lessens prejudice, right? So, yeah, I think that's a nice conclusion to his argument, right? And then he goes on to, if we take that as his conclusion, if we say that yes, prejudice and discrimination against people with disabilities exists, but there's ways to remedy it, we see him do that, right? Does he show us that discrimination and prejudice exists? Yeah, he talks to a number of people who have suffered these incidents, right? Does he show us that prejudice and discrimination is also operating at the state level? Yes, he does. He talks all about those laws. Morning, Scotty. Does he show us that indeed there are remedies to this prejudice? Yes, he does, right? So does Adam make a good argument? Yes, he does, right? So I wanted to point that out because, again, documentaries are arguments, right? They're trying to show you that something is a certain way, right? And so this one is very much an argument as well. Adam wants to show you something. He wants you to believe something. He's trying to convince you. He's not just walking around through his life with a camera seeing what happens, right? And it's kind of meant to feel that way, right? Like it feels like the camera's just following him around and he's just going on his little adventure. But it's not that, right? It's actually built in a certain way to convince the audience of something, right? And the only question, I guess, is he convincing? Does he make a good argument? Does he make a good argument? The other thing I'll point out about Adam's argument too is that, and something that's useful when you write papers is that Adam has a very narrow focus, right? So he could talk about oppression in general, but oppression is huge, right? Huge topic. Sexism, racism, disableism, all kinds of things. So he narrows it down, right? He's only talking about disableism. He's not talking about race or gender or sexuality or any of that stuff, right? But then he's going to narrow it down even further, right? He's really only talking about people with facial disfigurements. I know we talked to Dan a little bit earlier in the documentary, and Dan's in a wheelchair, but for the most part, he's talking about people with facial disfigurements. That's the whole thing, right? So he's narrowed his topic even more, right? So he's focused it down to just, the strongest point. And so try to think about that when you're writing your papers. The more focused you can be, the more you can write about it in more detail, in more nuance. If you go too big, you can't really say anything meaningful because it'll just be too general, right? If you write a paper about racism, like there's so much to say that you can't even begin to get into any detail because it's so big, right? But if you talk about racism against Indigenous people in Canada, okay, well that's a little more narrow, right? And maybe you can talk about how racism against Indigenous people affects people living in the downtown east side of Vancouver. Okay, even better, right? And then you could focus it even more. How does racism against Indigenous people in Canada living in the downtown east side, how has that been affected during the COVID-19 pandemic? Now you're really focused, right? And now you can actually talk about things. Racism is like, you know, again, it's so big, it's hard to say anything, you know, sort of insightful at all. You wind up making really general comments. But the more you can kind of focus in, the more room there is to talk about things. You know what I mean? And so for Adam here, if Adam was just talking about oppression, he really wouldn't be able to say anything new or interesting or detailed because it would just be too big. And so here he's focused in, looking kind of just at prejudice and discrimination, just against people with facial disfigurements. Most of it is really about him, right? There's a few supporting characters here, but most of it is just about him. And so, and yet he's still able to talk about things for almost an hour, right? So being more focused, sort of paring down your topics to something really kind of tight, that allows you to speak about things. And I think sometimes students, your instinct is to pick something big because you think you'll have lots more to say, but sometimes it works the opposite way. You can't really say anything meaningful or detailed because the topic is so big, or because it becomes so, you know, the things you might say about racism are so kind of obvious that you don't wind up saying anything interesting. So try to think about that. Try to, in your paper topics later on in this class or in other class, try to really focus it down. And the more you focus it, the more you can actually have room to talk about things. But the bigger it is, it's too big to deal with, right? It's way too big to deal with. Okay, so Adam makes an argument there, right? That, you know, actually disableism exists, prejudice against people with facial disfigurements exists. We can see it on an interpersonal level, we can see it at a societal level, but in fact, there are ways to remedy this, and one of them is just by interacting and spending time with people with disabilities, and he's trying to do his part, right? He's trying to help the situation. Now, my last question for you before we maybe leave Adam is, will it work? So his plan to kind of, you know, do stand-up comedy and kind of reach out to people, is that helpful for people with disabilities? Yeah, why?
It helps the society to know about the disabled people also know it. Cannot forget.
Yeah, so it helps to reduce prejudice, right? It helps when he's out there sort of with his face on the news or his face on a documentary, or whether he's doing stand-up comedy, it helps reduce people's prejudice levels, right? And it probably worked for us too, right? Now we kind of know who Adam is, and we're like, oh yeah, he's kind of a normal guy, he's kind of funny maybe, you know, we know a little bit about him, seems okay, right? Seems like a good guy. And so, yeah, he's doing that, and we see that it works in a psychological test, and I think we could almost kind of say, yeah, I think it kind of works for us too, right? We kind of got used to him, and we're like, okay, there's no big deal, right? He has a face that is kind of outside of what society deems to be normal, but other than that, he's a pretty normal guy, right? So I think it worked for us. The prejudice level kind of reduced in the documentary, but we can probably kind of feel that happening with ourselves too. We kind of just got used to him, and we're like, oh yeah, okay, he's just a normal person, right? So Adam's attempts will be helpful and useful, but in what way will they not be helpful? like he will be able to kind of reduce prejudice through his kind of individual outreach efforts, but what will he not be able to fix?
His face.
Okay, probably not. But what to do with disableism? What will he not be able to fix?
Maybe the law.
Right. We have some legal issues, do we not? Yeah. What were our legal issues?
The police is embarrassed of asking disabled.
Right. There's a police training issue in terms of investigating potential disability hate crimes. So there's a police training issue that doesn't get resolved through his stand-up comedy. Sorry, Adam, but it doesn't. What else doesn't get resolved?
You can't change everyone.
Definitely, yeah. Well, we could say that, right? Adam will not be able to reach everyone.
Because he has self-confidence, but maybe other disabled people don't.
It's true, right? He has enough self-confidence to kind of put himself out there and meet people. And it's probably not easy for him. It's not easy for any of us to kind of be that outgoing sometimes. But he's able to do it. But not everyone will be able to do it. Not everyone will feel comfortable to be able to do what he does. And he's only one man, right? He cannot end oppression on his own, right? It's not a reasonable request of Adam. What was the other legal thing, though?
He can't change the law, like the punishment for a disabled person accusing a disabled one than the religious one.
Right. So there was that kind of inequality in terms of punishments, right? So someone convicted of a disability hate crime was only going to get 6 months in prison. A religious or racially motivated hate crime got 2 years. So Adam's stand-up comedy doesn't really fix that either, does it? So, and I'm not beating up here on Adam, because what he's doing is really more than he should have to, right? And often we see this is when we have an oppression in society, whether it's based on gender or race or sexuality, often it's the minoritized group that needs to do the extra work in order to gain equality or gain recognition. And they shouldn't have to, right? This shouldn't be Adam's thing to sort out, right? Because Adam doesn't have the issue, right? Well, he does have the issue, but this is not Adam's problem to solve, really. Well, it should be the dominant group that needs to look at what's happening and, make changes, right? But often it doesn't come from the dominant group because, again, their privilege, blinds them to what's going on. And so it almost always falls to the minoritized group to step up, right? Every time we have a terrorist attack, either domestically or internationally, who has to step up and try to sort of reach out to the greater community, if it's a Muslim terrorist, for instance? Who steps up? It's the Muslim community, right? Suddenly Muslim leaders step up and have to say, look, we don't condone this. We think this is awful. We are, Canadians or Americans, and we're, peaceful, normal people going about our lives. We're not that thing, right? And so it always falls to the minoritized group to have to do the extra work. And again, it shouldn't really be like that. It's not fair, but often it winds up being that way. And so here you see Adam as a member of the minoritized group. He's the one who has to do the extra work to gain that equality, whether that's fair or not. But my point here is that, yeah, his efforts are useful and his efforts will benefit things, but there are greater things that have to happen too, right? Society has to talk about these things. Clearly, society is not talking about disableism and disability hate crime, and it needs to, because people are getting assaulted and killed and nobody seems to be too concerned about it, right? That needs attention, right? That's wrong, right? We have laws that do not protect these people the same way as they protect other minoritized groups, right? That is not fair, right? That sends the message that they are not as important or as valued or as worthy of protection. And they absolutely are, right? Absolutely are. That needs to be fixed too. And so again, Adam's efforts are helpful and will work. I think we've seen them work, but there's other things that need to change too, right? It's not just individual action, and it's not just his individual action. And it's not even individual actions that he should have to take. Should he have to go out there and prove to everyone that he's a normal person? No, right? Do any of us have to do that? Well, maybe a little bit, but not to that degree, right? We do have to try to convince people around us that we're normal, but we don't have to work that hard, right? Where he has to work a lot harder just to get people to accept him as a regular person. And again, that's part of privilege as well, that he doesn't have and we do. And again, I'm not saying that's the way it should be, I'm saying that's the way it is. Any other comments on Adam Pearson or disableism or whatever before we kind of leave him and move on to other things? Is there anything else that needs to be said or questions that need to be asked? No? All good? Okay. Okay, so let's see. Right. So Adam talked a lot about prejudice and a little bit about stereotype and discrimination and things like that. He didn't talk too much about privilege, and so I did want to, because we finished off our oppression unit with the idea of privilege, I wanted to kind of shine a light on it here, particularly because privilege to do with disabled people is kind of much easier to see. Sometimes the privilege that they don't have is kind of more external and more structural, and so it's easier to imagine in some cases, okay? So we talked about this at the end, I think, of the oppression section. We talked about external and internal dimensions of privilege. So we said before that there were 3 elements to this external privilege. So we said the integration of dominant group norms into the structures of society. We said that the dominant group gets to construct what's normal and not normal, and an invisibility of privilege, right? So let's look at the structural thing. So all of us are probably familiar with this particular environment, right? Does anyone who takes a bus here in the morning? Bus riders? Who has taken a bus in Vancouver? Hopefully, probably most of us, all of us. Yeah, absolutely. So this is very obviously a Vancouver bus, right? But elements of structural privilege are evident, right? So you get on the bus, right, and you step onto it probably with no trouble at all, right? If you have a mobility issue, or if you're using a walker or if you're using a wheelchair, you can't really get into the bus. And of course, the buses here have the little ramp. Yeah, the little ramp that comes down and people can wheel on, right? And which is great, but buses weren't always that way. When I was young, we took buses that were, I'm from Edmonton, so I don't know what they were doing here, but our buses were from like the 1960s. And when you got on the bus, you actually went upstairs. There was 3 stairs, and then you sat down. And so people with mobility issues were not getting on those buses, right? People in wheelchairs, people with those little scooter things that they drive around, people with walkers, not happening, right? And so accommodations have been made to these buses in order to account for that. But buses are still kind of constructed with the dominant group in mind. And the dominant group is us, right? People who can see and hear and walk around on their feet and use their hands. All of those things are still evident in the construction of the bus, right? Those seats aren't very big, are they? Not really. Most of you are kind of, of an average size. I find them kind of on the small side. And again, I'm not huge, but I kind of find them a little crunched, right? But what if I weighed 350 pounds?
Probably bend the chair, I guess.
I'd what?
Probably bend the chair.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? If I weighed 350 pounds and I got on the bus, could I just sit anywhere I wanted? No, right? Those seats are not going to accommodate me. Maybe I can sit on 2 of them, right? Maybe I can take up the whole 2 if there's 2 available. But it's going to be a bit of a squeeze for me, right? Those seats are not made for me if I'm 350 pounds. They're made for people smaller than me. And they're made for people that are even smaller than I currently am because, again, they're a little squished for me. But imagine again, if I'm 350 pounds and I'm walking around, what can I sit on? Can I sit on that chair right there that Scotty's sitting on?
No, probably not.
Probably not, right? Because these chairs have a weight rating, right? And these chairs probably have a weight rating of about 225 to 250 pounds, give or take. Most regular chairs are weight rated around there, right? Because most people do not weigh more than 250 pounds, right? But if I do, can I sit on that chair? Not a good idea, right? What if it breaks? Is that going to be embarrassing? Is it going to be dangerous?
It is dangerous. Like, these things are designed for the majority of society.
They are.
If, like, everything is designed for everyone, then they're going to cost a lot more.
Absolutely, right? So that's the question, right? Is that we can design any world we want, right? We have a robot running around Mars, taking pictures for us, taking video, right? We can do all kinds of different things, and so it is interesting to notice that we do not build society in order to accommodate more groups of people, right? There are people out there that weigh 350 pounds, for sure. Not as many of them here in Vancouver. Vancouver is a very fit city, but if you go to other cities in Canada, if you go to the United States, you will find that they are not quite as fit as we are here in Vancouver, right? And so again, there's lots of these chairs made, but if you weigh 350 pounds, you cannot and should not sit on one, right? Which is made all the worse because if you're carrying 125 or so extra pounds, you might want to sit down, right? That's very tiring to carry that much extra weight. Your body is probably not designed to carry that much weight. And so you might want to sit down, but in fact, you cannot. Or sitting down is actually dangerous for you to do, right? I've talked about this before, but what about curb cuts, right? These are actually, you've seen these running around Vancouver, right? You've seen these little things. They're a little step down onto the street. So if you're using a walker or if you're in a wheelchair or on a scooter, you can just pop down into the crosswalk and then get back up onto the curb. But these are recent. We didn't always have these. I think building codes only start to include them in the 1990s. And so prior to the 1990s, if you're in a wheelchair, it might be difficult for you to get up the curb, right? If you're crossing the street and you can't get up the curb, what do you have to do? You could try and ask someone to lift you onto the curb, but that seems dangerous and a little embarrassing, right? What if no one's around? What if you're like stuck and you can't get up onto the curb? Then what? Yeah, then you might have to go on the road and maybe try to find like a driveway or something to go up. But is that safe? No, definitely not. You're going to get run over, right? So again, these things are very, are very simple, but again, we didn't make that accommodation for the longest time. And so people in wheelchairs couldn't take public transit. It was difficult for them to get around in, just walking or just moving down sidewalks. And why? Because society is designed for people like you and me, right? And then we try to make little accommodations here and there for people who are differently abled. The construction of what's normal and not normal is usually made by the dominant group. And so here are 2 faces. And so one of them I hope you'll recognize as our good friend Adam Pearson. Anyone recognize the other guy? From what?
The Office.
From The Office? Yeah, so that's Steve Carell. Who's his character on The Office? Michael, the boss? Michael Smith? Michael Scott, that's what his name is, yeah. Steve Carell here is a movie actor. He's been in a ton of different movies and is got famous from The Office, of course. And so here we have two faces, right? But one of them we would probably describe as very normal, perhaps even handsome. I know a lot of women like the beard on Steve Carell here. And one of them is defined as not normal. And so the question is not so much, I'm not trying to sort of insult Adam here, but I'm saying one face is recognized as normal, one is recognized as outside of normal. But what makes one face normal and the other face not normal? They both have two eyes, they both have a nose and a mouth, they're both wearing glasses, they both have a hairstyle, right? Adam's a little kind of more carefree and scruffy here. Steve's a little more kind of trimmed, but that's okay. Both of these guys are dressed up on the red carpet, it looks like. Both of these faces kind of do the same thing, right? So Adam's got eyes in his head so that he can see his way through the world, and so does Steve. Both of them have a nose to hold up their glasses. That's handy. Both of them can probably smell things. Both of them talk with their mouths. So these faces are actually quite a bit similar in terms of their overall form and their function.
The thing is that they're pretty similar, but it's only the fact that Adam's face was like deformed that makes a lot of people feel disgusted.
Yes, and so, but that's what I'm asking you to consider, because you said it's because his face is deformed, right? So what makes one face formed and one deformed? How do we define what's not normal here? Again, and I think that most of society would probably say Adam's face falls outside of what normal is, but where's that boundary? Where's the line between normal and not normal? Because I look around in this room, and I include myself here, everyone's face is unique, right? Everyone's face is different from the next one. Are all of our faces perfectly symmetrical?
No.
I don't think so. All of our noses are different shapes, and our lips and our eyes are different color. Our skins are slightly different color. Our hair is kind of different or missing entirely. So we're all unique. We're all different, right? But I don't think any of us would look around the room and say that any of us is not normal, right? I think most of us would look around and say these are all normal human faces. They're all unique. They're all different. All of us show some evidence of the sort of part of the world we come from, perhaps, but none of these faces is not normal. And yet, Adam, we would probably describe that as being not normal. And so, again, this is a bit of a rhetorical question. I'm not really asking for an answer, but I am asking you to consider where the line is, right? Where do we draw the line between normal face and not normal face, right? Because, yeah, Adam's face is bigger, but some people have big faces.
They have eyebrow and eyelash.
Okay, his eyebrows, I think he's got eyelashes in there. His eyebrows are kind of hard to kind of determine. It looks like he's got more of a left eyebrow than a right, but his skin is kind of lumpy there, so it's kind of hard to tell what's going on. But I mean, people's eyebrows are different, right? We all have different eyebrows. His face is larger, but again, some people have big faces. His
What about the chin? The chin is one.
Yeah, he's got a big chin, but some people have a big chin.
His ears. One of his ears is bumpy.
Oh yeah, his ears are a little crooked.
Yeah.
Lots of our ears are crooked too. Mine are slightly crooked. When you get glasses, sometimes they have to bend them a little bit to get them to fit properly, right? All of us are a little bit, none of us is perfect, right? All of our faces are a little bit, a little bit asymmetrical. A nose or a chin or something might be slightly larger or smaller than the average, whatever the average is. Yeah, we're all a little different, and yet Adam's a little different too, or maybe a lot different. But again, I'm inviting you to just think about where the line is, right? And again, these two have faces that are in many ways very, very similar. These are both human faces, but again, one is considered normal, one not so much. I wanted to point out some other internal and attitudinal dimensions of privilege as well, okay? But let me just see, am I in the right place here? Oh yeah, oh, we're gonna do that first. Oh yeah, okay, right, okay. I remember how I wanted to do this. So there's internal and attitudinal aspects to privilege as well. And we talked about these ones, or I named them really briefly before. The idea that people have a right to their position, ideas about a group's superiority, a lack of humility that results from limited knowledge of the minoritized group, and again, the invisibility of privilege. And so I have a little short story that I want you to read. It's very short, it's like a page long. And it'll allow us to talk about this, but maybe first we'll take a bit of a break, and then when we come back, we'll look at this very short story, and it will kind of help explain some of these things, okay? So take a break, come back, and we'll deal with this. All right, and we're back. So I said that I wanted to talk a little bit about privilege with regard to ableism or disableism, whichever one you want to say. And some of these I mentioned in the oppression section, and at the time when I mentioned them, they probably weren't clear. This little story will help make them clear. The story is actually quite good at doing that, okay? So what I would like to do is I would like to ask you to read this very short story. And so I've posted it in Microsoft Teams, and it is called, I'm just going to look again and see what it's called. It is called, so it's on Microsoft Teams in Files under Readings and Questions, and it is called, it's called Internal and Attitudinal Dimensions of Privilege. So again, I'd like to just give you a little time to read it. It's very short. It's very easy to read. And then we'll answer some of these questions, okay? So let's have a read, and then we'll come back and talk about these things, okay? one more minute or 2 more minutes. Okay. So, cute little story, or maybe not so cute, kind of strange, right? A little depressing, right? And obviously a fictional story because it's a story about people with a third eye in the back of their head, right? But let's talk about this in terms of real privilege, okay? So I said that there was 3 external or structural elements to privilege, that the dominant group sort of creates structures of society based on what's normal for them. The dominant group gets to decide what things are normal and not normal. And the dominant group's privilege is usually invisible to them. So give me some examples. What do you see of this kind of external or structural privilege playing out in the story? The play?
Yes.
Okay, what's going on at the play?
So there are parts of the play that you can't see without a third eye.
Right. So our person, who I think is a she, I think it's a she. So she goes to a play and she sits down and she's reading the little program they give you, right? So it says, it says who the actors are and what other things they were in and stuff like that. And so she's trying to read it, but because other people have 3 eyes, it's kind of built in a way that you can see it, you can read it, and the person in front of you can read it at the same time, right? And so our person here, our 2-eyed person, is, trying to figure out in what order to read this thing, right? So yeah, the play program has been created to privilege 3-eyed people. 2-eyed people are having a hard time reading this thing. What else? What other structural elements of privilege are there, or external elements? What's that?
They're scary.
Who?
There's people with 3 eyes because child see them cry.
No, it's the 3-eyed kids who are crying at the sight of the 2-eyed person. So the 2-eyed person leaves her neighborhood. She goes to a little restaurant or a diner, and it's the 3-eyed kids who are pointing at her and crying. That's what's happening. Not the 3-eyed people are normal. Normal. It's this 2-eyed freak. That's who's weird. Right? What else?
They're kind of divided, like 2-eyed people live in another city and 3-eyed people live in another city.
Ooh, yeah, they are segregated, right? There's a neighborhood for 2-eyed people, and it seems to be separate from the larger world of 3-eyed people, right? This group seems to be segregated in a ghetto or a neighborhood or a hood or whatever you want to call it. They're separate. What else is happening? Other structural or external elements of privilege. There's lots more. Lots of things happening. What other things are there?
It's about the environmental surroundings, right?
Yeah, it has to do with the external environment, or physical things that are in the external environment.
The menu at the cafe. The waiter asked the protagonist whether she can see it, so I assume your third eye.
Yeah, that one's a tricky one, but yeah, the menu is behind her, right? So she's sitting at the table. Our two-eyed person is sitting at the table, and this person says, "Oh, can I have a menu?" But it's actually on the wall behind her, but she can't see it. Everyone else can because they have an eye on the back of their head, but she can't see it. And so the waitress is like, "Oh." And so this two-eyed person has to turn around to look at it, right? So yeah, the menu board is up there, assuming that everyone can see it with their third eye. But of course, our person here, our two-eyed person, cannot see it, right?
And the glasses store, I forgot what it's called, but it's basically the store with glasses for three-eyed person.
Yeah.
And the main protagonist in the story only has two eyes, so she wants to have something that she can blend in with the environment, but the shopkeeper or saleswoman, I think, said like, no, you can't do that. You need to use like a modified three-eyed glasses.
Yeah, that's a good one because there's an external and an internal one, right? So number one, there are sunglasses that are made for three-eyed people. Duh, you would expect that. But the ones that are for three-eyed people, those are the fashionable ones. Those are the cool ones. Those are what all the celebrities are wearing. The ones for two-eyed people, they're kind of hokey, right? They're not cool. You wouldn't want to wear them. And so our person here is trying on one of the fashionable pairs that have the three lenses. And again, it doesn't matter, right? Because even if you don't have an eye back there, you can still wear these glasses and look cool like everyone else. But then, and we'll get to this in a minute, but the salesperson's like, "Oh no, those aren't for you. You come over here because these are for you," right? The uncool ones. Even though this person can very easily, wear the three-eyed ones, right? What does that do then? When, if she buys the sunglasses and she buys the uncool ones, and she puts them on and goes out into society, what does society automatically know about her? She has two eyes, right? She's not one of them. She's not normal, right? It marks her difference, right? The fact that she has sunglasses that are specifically made for her, it shows that, oh, she's different, right? She's not one of us. There's another example of that marking difference as well. The cane, right? So they go to she goes to the theater. It's a little bit dark in the theater, and the person working there says, "Oh, here, you need to take this." Do any of you need a cane to get around with your two eyes? No, two eyes are just fine, right? You can very clearly navigate where you're going. But again, she's given this cane and it marks her difference, right? It's a visual signal to people around her that, oh, she's not one of us. She's different, right? Even though she doesn't need the cane and she doesn't need the special sunglasses either, right? But they mark her difference. They identify her as different to society. What else is there?
The part where he had to win the award because of being courageous and inspired.
That might be an internal one, but let's talk about it. So the play is about this young three-eyed man who was really good looking and talented and had his whole life ahead of him, and then tragedy struck and he lost his third eye somehow in an accident or whatever. And life must just be over, right? Why even go on living? But he persevered and found meaning in a life with only two eyes. Right? Again, is life worth living with only two eyes? Yeah, of course it is, right? But again, there's this, inspirational story about how this guy overcomes the loss of his third eye. And how does our protagonist feel with two eyes? How does she feel watching that? What's the message she's receiving?
It's the opposite of being inspired, actually.
It's the opposite of being?
Like, it's the opposite of feeling like more confident, I think, because at the end, she didn't feel any sort of confidence at all.
She did not, right? It definitely made her feel less confident, and it made her feel bad about herself, right? Because yeah, like, what's the message? Yeah, that they're inferior, that, can you imagine living with only two eyes? What an awful experience. Why even go on, right?
But it's probably inspirational for people who actually lost the eye in the back of the head in that society.
Perhaps it is, but the question is not only, that's the thing, is that we talked about that in terms of microaggressions, right? There's what people are intending to communicate and then how it's actually landing, right? So maybe three-eyed people think that they're communicating, look at this inspirational story. This young man overcomes an injury, right? And part of it is that, and no doubt they meant it to be that way. That's the intent of the play. But it lands totally different for the minoritized group, right? It lands totally different for this woman who feels like, so my life is not worth living? Like, for me to carry on and live a life is a brave and courageous thing? Like, she's been enjoying her life up to this point, right? She's lived with her people, she's had a great childhood, everything has been fantastic. And then she goes out into this world, and this world is constantly telling her that she's different, that she's not normal, that she, doesn't she want to be normal? That, a life with two eyes is somehow less than a life with three eyes, right? And she's getting all of these messages very quickly moving around society, right? So so Mulder, I wouldn't doubt that, that the people who wrote a play like this certainly wouldn't have intended to make her feel bad. In fact, they were probably trying to make three-eyed people feel good, but they're feeling good at the expense of two-eyed people.
Like, they are living in separate cities, so they wouldn't expect a person born with two eyes to see that movie. They would expect a person born with three eyes and then loses an eye to see it.
Sure, and you could probably extend that even further. So your comment was that they're living in different parts of the city, and so maybe they wouldn't expect a two-eyed person to see this play. That's entirely possible. The other thing is that they probably wouldn't have even thought about it, because again, dominant groups tend not to have the same experience as minoritized groups, and they tend not to think too much about it either, right? They don't really consider too much about what two-eyed people might be thinking or feeling, because they assume that two-eyed people think and feel the exact same things as three-eyed people do. But that's not the case, right? We see that very clearly with this two-eyed person walking through society and feeling like she's being hit left and right with messages that she's not good enough, that there's something wrong with her, that she's somehow less or not normal, or why doesn't she want to be fixed? Why doesn't she want to be normal like everyone else? When in fact, up until she walked out of her neighborhood, she felt normal. She was normal. But now suddenly these messages are telling her that in fact, no, she's not. Other stuff. Other elements of privilege, either internal or external. There's more.
When she was told to leave the sunglasses shop and she just left. Isn't that internal?
She didn't have what?
When she was told to leave the glasses shop
Oh, yeah, what happened?
and she left. She didn't be like, oh, she did like that. Yeah.
She-
just left.
She did a little, right? Didn't she say something to the girls? There were those teenage girls or the teenagers that were acting kind of very rude and were making comments like, oh my God, can you imagine being born like that? What happened to you? Why are two-eyed people so angry all the time? And she does say something, doesn't she? Or is she about to? And then she did say something? What'd she say? That they're being rude, which is true, right? They're being rude. And so, but anyway, she leaves the store without really buying anything. But it's a pretty negative experience for her, right? People are sitting there saying, oh my God, what is she even doing here anyway, right? What is that comment? What's the meaning behind that comment? What's she even doing here? It's not for her. She doesn't belong, right? Why is she here? And again, why would she not want to buy sunglasses, right? Especially fashionable ones. Again, if they've got an extra lens, who cares, right? If I was missing an eye, and God willing, hopefully I never will be, but because I like my two eyes, but if I was ever missing one, would I still buy cool-looking sunglasses? Yeah. Should I still be allowed to wear cool-looking sunglasses? Or do I have to find ones that only have one eye because I don't need that other one anyway, right? So what she's doing, it's entirely reasonable for her to be in this store, and yet the message is, oh, she doesn't belong here, right? She's not one of us. She's different. She's not normal. What else? What about the doctor? The doctor that approaches her and says, hey, psst, I can give you a third eye. I can fix you, right? I can make you normal, right? And what's our person's reaction to that? What's your personal reaction to that if somebody came up to you and said, hey, I can implant a third eye in the back of your head? Any takers? Anybody want a third eye in the back of their head? Huh?
Yes,
If we apply that to our society, like for someone who's missing an arm and you can give them a robot arm, I think they would take it, like, because it's necessary, but a third eye isn't really necessary to that person.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is that determining what's necessary and what's normal is done by the dominant group. And so is a third eye necessary? Well, no, we kind of all know that it's not. But we're also living in a society where two eyes is the normal situation, right? And so Mulder makes a good point, is that, if this was someone who was missing an arm, would they not want, I assume you're proposing a Winter Soldier-like robotic arm, right? Absolutely, yes. So yeah, one would think that would be useful, and maybe it is a good thing, but it's also how these things are kind of presented and phrased, right? Don't you want to be normal? Don't you want to be like us, right? And again, an arm can be a very useful thing, but it's also a very useful thing because of the society that we live in, right? So there's kind of two parts to this, and in a way that the fictional story, in some way is a good metaphor for other sort of interactions between dominant and minoritized groups, and in some ways it's not, right? And so we certainly want to help people, right? Especially people whose mobility might be reduced or quality of life might be reduced. So we do want to be able to help people, but it also depends sort of how and why we're doing what we're doing. And so this is where the metaphor is kind of not perfect. And so I see what you're saying. But yeah, so it's not a perfect metaphor. Anything else that we missed? What are some other little, maybe more subtle microaggressions or little pieces of discrimination that this person experiences? Yeah, children staring or crying. I bet that doesn't feel very good. What else? What does the waitress do when she's handing back the change?
She didn't want to touch me.
Right, so this woman, our two-eyed woman, she paid for her meal, there was change, and so she held out her hand for the change, and the waitress purposely put it on the table, right, in order to not touch her, right? Think the two-eyed person noticed that? Yep, sure did. How does that feel, I wonder? Oh, I don't want to touch you. There's something wrong with you, right? Of course, nowadays it's like you might have COVID, so nobody wants to touch anybody. But pre-COVID, yeah, that she notices that, right? Okay. We're just about out of time. I want to come back to that tomorrow. Yeah, we'll tie up this tomorrow, and then I've got another little thing to show you. But maybe I'll end it here. I'll end it here, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Yeah, I'll see you all tomorrow. So have a good day. Thanks for being here. That's it.